When men speak of imagination, they often treat it as a child's toy, a fanciful plaything to be set aside when one has grown old enough to deal with the so-called real world. Yet, I have found that the opposite is true. It is not our reason alone that teaches us to see truth, but our imagination that first gives truth its shape and savor. Without imagination, reason may prove that a statement is correct, but it cannot help us to care whether it is important. A mathematical equation may be flawless, but until it is clothed with meaning, it does not stir the heart. It is imagination that provides the garment, the organ through which meaning becomes visible to the soul. Strip away imagination, and you will find yourself living in a world of skeletons, accurate perhaps, but lifeless. Imagination, then, is not the enemy of reason, but its companion and interpreter. Reason is the natural organ of truth. Imagination is the organ of meaning. Without reason, imagination may wander into folly, but without imagination, reason becomes barren. The two, rightly wed, give birth to understanding. We see this most clearly when we consider the great story of the gospel. Reason may assure me that Christ was crucified under Pontius Pilate, that he rose again the third day, and that witnesses beheld him. These are facts, as hard as the stone upon which Jerusalem itself rests. Yet it is only imagination that makes the story live. Through imagination, I perceive not merely that an event occurred, but that this event is for me. That a man rose from the dead is astonishing enough, but that he rose for my sake, and that his rising shatters the night of my own mortality, that is meaning. The poets, more than the logicians, have often been the midwives of conversion. A line of poetry, a glimpse of a sunset, the cry of a bird at dawn. These do not prove, but they awaken. They stir the slumbering soul, reminding it of something it has always known, but long forgotten. For there is in us all a faint memory, like the lingering perfume of a place once visited, that we were made for more than this present world. Reason may analyze this longing, but imagination alone teaches us to feel its weight. Think, for instance, of a child reading a fairy tale. The story speaks of far-off lands, of dragons and knights, of quests and treasures. At first glance, it is only make-believe. But in truth, what the child loves in the tale is not dragons nor swords, but the scent of a reality beyond the tale. In the shimmering distance of fairy, the child discovers a longing for goodness, for courage, for beauty, for a joy too great to be contained in this world. That longing is not false. It is, in fact, more real than the wooden chair upon which he sits to read. For the chair will crumble, but the longing is eternal. Imagination, then, functions as a window. Thin, fragile, easily dismissed by the skeptic, yet opening onto the infinite. Through that window we glimpse heaven. It is the same window through which Christ spoke in parables, knowing that a story of seeds and soils, though simple, could lodge more deeply in a man's heart than a dozen syllogisms. A seed, after all, grows silently and secretly, while arguments often bounce off the walls of our resistance. I once said that our desires are not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition, when infinite joy is offered us. And here, imagination performs its holy task. It awakens us to recognize that what we call joy in this world is but a shadow of the greater joy, a rehearsal for the real music that waits in eternity. Without imagination, we risk mistaking the shadow for the substance. A kiss, for instance, is not only flesh meeting flesh, It is a signpost of something far greater, a hint of the love that moves the sun and the stars. Imagination allows us to see in the kiss not merely a biological impulse, but a symbol of union, intimacy, and the echo of God's own creative delight. Thus, imagination is not an escape from reality, but the means by which reality discloses its fullness. The very word meaning implies something beyond the literal, just as a road sign points to a destination beyond itself. If you mistake the sign for the journey, you will never arrive. But if you let imagination interpret the sign, you begin to travel towards the country to which it points. There is, I believe, no greater tragedy than a man who has silenced his imagination. He may be brilliant, calculating, efficient, but he has traded away the music of the spheres for the ticking of a clock. He sees the world as a collection of atoms, but never as a temple filled with glory. He counts the stars, but forgets to marvel at them. He analyzes the rose, but never smells it. Such a man may live in a world of fact, but never in a world of meaning. And so, if you would keep your soul alive, guard your imagination, as one guards a lamp in a storm. Do not despise the stories that awakened you as a child, nor the poems that haunt you still, nor the fleeting glimpses of beauty that interrupt your daily toil. They are not distractions from truth, but signals of it. They are the notes of a song that heaven is already singing, and to which earth only imperfectly hums along. The world is filled with signs and wonders for those who have eyes to see. But eyes must first be opened, and it is imagination that opens them. Imagination, as I have said, is the organ of meaning. It grants us not only the capacity to delight in stories and pictures, but also the courage to live our own story with seriousness. For if imagination can awaken us to the reality of heaven, it can also awaken us to the reality of hell. Do not think that imagination is only for comfort. It is also for warning. When Christ spoke of unquenchable fire, of outer darkness, of the gnashing of teeth, he employed the language of imagination to shock us into awareness. For while reason may deduce the moral law, imagination makes us tremble at the thought of breaking it. It is a grave mistake to suppose that imagination means unreality. It is, in fact, quite the reverse. Imagination interprets reality. A man without imagination lives in the thinnest, poorest world possible. He may measure the distance to the stars with his instruments, but he has no sense that the heavens declare the glory of God. He may explain the chemical composition of a meal, but he never tastes thanksgiving. He may catalogue virtues and vices in a textbook, but he has never felt the chill of despair or the sweetness of forgiveness. It is imagination that breathes color into what would otherwise remain a lifeless sketch. Consider how even the scriptures themselves depend upon imagination to be heard. The psalmist declares, "The Lord is my shepherd." Now, reason may object, but he is not literally a shepherd, nor we sheep. That is true enough, but imagination sees the metaphor as a doorway into deeper meaning. By imagination we come to know what it is to be guided, protected, and loved. Without imagination, such words would lie dead on the page. With imagination, they become food for the soul. It is no accident, I think, that when God wished to speak to men, he often spoke in visions and dreams. He gave Ezekiel wheels within wheels, Daniel beasts rising from the sea, John a city with gates of pearl and streets of gold. These are not trifles, not fancies, but revelations. For what cannot be comprehended by reason alone can sometimes be borne by imagination, like sunlight refracted through a stained glass window. truth often reaches us clothed in images. And this is why the loss of imagination in our age is so perilous. For we live in a time that prizes utility over beauty, calculation over contemplation, machinery over mystery. We are tempted to think of imagination as mere distraction, an indulgence for artists and children, while the serious business of life lies elsewhere. But it is precisely the opposite. Without imagination, men cease to see life as a drama and begin to treat it as machinery. The soul withers when it no longer hears the music of meaning. I have found, too, that imagination is the handmaid of hope. When I picture the heavenly country, even in my most faltering images, I am drawn forward. Reason may tell me that heaven is promised, but imagination lets me taste its promise now. It is the weight of glory, the sense that we were not made merely for survival, but for splendor. The beauty of a starlit night, or the majesty of the sea, awakens in us a homesickness, an ache, not for anything we have seen, but for something we have only glimpsed. This ache is imagination's finest work. It teaches us that the object of our longing is not here, yet assures us that it exists somewhere. And do you not see? This is why the Incarnation matters so deeply. The Word became flesh not only to save us, but to awaken us. The invisible became visible. The eternal took shape in time, so that our imaginations might have a form to cling to. To see the face of Christ is to see the invisible made tangible. It is to realize that our stories, our symbols, our longings, all find their fulfillment in Him. Therefore, I urge you, do not distrust imagination. Rather, baptize it. Let it be purified, not discarded. The devil is quite willing to make use of a corrupted imagination, filling it with false idols and empty promises. But God is the true master of this faculty, for He gave it to us. And when imagination is sanctified, it becomes not a snare, but a ladder, leading us ever upward toward truth, goodness, and beauty. In this way, imagination functions like a lamp carried in a dark forest. It cannot alter the path itself, but it casts light upon the stones and roots, helping us to walk more surely. And sometimes, when the night is deepest, imagination catches a gleam of dawn far off, and reminds us that the morning is coming. It is important to recognize that imagination is not simply private fancy, confined to the inner chamber of one's mind. It is rather the bridge between our inner world and the eternal world. When sanctified, imagination allows us to glimpse the contours of reality that reason alone cannot chart. Reason is like the lamp that shows us the stones immediately before our feet. Imagination is the horizon that gives the journey its destination. Every man, whether he admits it or not, lives by some vision shaped by imagination. The materialist imagines a closed universe, with men as mere accidents of atoms. The hedonist imagines life as a banquet where the wine will never run out. The Christian imagines a pilgrim road, winding through shadow and sorrow, leading to a country where every tear will be dried. And though one may insist upon facts and deny imagination's place, the truth is that every worldview is first imagined before it is reasoned. For before we prove, we picture. Before we define, we dream. This is why Christ Himself so often spoke in parables. A parable is not a mere illustration of a moral truth. It is truth clothed in the flesh of imagination. The story of the prodigal son does not merely argue that God is merciful. It paints mercy in such a way that we feel its weight. We see the Father's arms, smell the feast, hear the music. Mercy becomes not an abstraction, but a banquet that can be tasted. And once we have tasted it in imagination, our reason can assent more firmly. If you would see the power of imagination, observe how even sin corrupts it. Temptation is never merely the presentation of a fact. It is an imagined delight, a painted illusion of pleasure or power. We fall not because we are ignorant, but because our imagination has been bewitched. Thus, to overcome temptation, our imagination must be re-enchanted with a greater vision. The tempter whispers of false treasures. Christ shows us a pearl of great price. To resist sin, then, is not only to argue with reason, but to love with imagination. There is also in imagination a kind of prophetic strain. It speaks to us of what is not yet, but ought to be. When Isaiah saw a world where swords would become plowshares, he was not reporting present fact, but painting the possibility of divine fulfillment. That vision has shaped nations and movements long after the prophet himself had gone to dust. Reason may conclude what is. Imagination dares to declare what shall be. But we must guard imagination carefully, for it is a double-edged gift. It may raise us to the threshold of heaven, or it may plunge us into illusions. A man who worships his fantasies will soon find that his idols betray him. But a man who offers his imagination back to God will discover that it is a channel of grace. To live without imagination is to live half dead. To live by imagination without truth is to be deceived, but to live with imagination baptized by truth is to live abundantly. I do not suggest that we abandon reason in favor of imagination. The two are meant to be companions, not rivals. Reason tests, guards, and refines imagination, while imagination inspires, warms, and directs reason. Together they form the full stature of man as a creature made in the image of God. To mutilate one in favor of the other is to hobble the soul. A man without reason is like a ship without a rudder. A man without imagination is like a ship without wind. But the man with both sails and rudder may truly journey toward the far country of God. And let me say this as plainly as I can. Imagination is not only a human faculty, it is a divine invitation. For in every stirring of wonder, in every pang of longing, in every haunting by beauty, God is knocking. He is awakening in us the sense that we are strangers in this world, pilgrims on the road, meant for a home we have not yet seen. If you have ever been pierced by the beauty of a song, or undone by the sight of a mountain, or filled with aching joy at the laughter of a child, then you have felt this invitation. That is not illusion. It is the pulse of eternity, echoing in the chambers of your soul. So I urge you, treasure imagination. Do not starve it on the dry bread of cynicism, nor surrender it to the falsehoods of the age. Feed it with scripture, with poetry, with beauty, with the great stories of the saints, and the greater story of Christ. For when imagination is nourished by truth, it will not lead you astray. Rather, it will open your eyes to the world as it truly is, a world shot through with glory, a shadowland that points to substance, a wilderness road that leads to home. There is, in every true act of imagination, an echo of creation itself. For when God made the world, he did not merely calculate. It was not as though he assembled the universe like a mechanic tightening bolts. No, he spoke. And in speaking, he clothed reality with beauty as well as structure. The stars were not only arranged but adorned, the flowers not only useful but radiant. the creatures not merely functional, but delightful. Creation is poetry as much as it is architecture, song as much as it is engineering. And if we, being made in the image of such a Creator, find ourselves compelled to imagine, it is because we are reflecting a fragment of His own eternal artistry. Think of it this way. When we imagine, we are not inventing meaning ex nihilo, but discovering it. We are like miners uncovering jewels buried in the deep caverns of the universe. Our task is not to fabricate significance, but to unveil the significance that God has already woven into the fabric of all things. Imagination, rightly used, does not create fantasy to escape the world, but reveals truth that is hidden within the world. This is why imagination awakens that strange longing which I have sometimes called Sehnsucht, an inconsolable homesickness, a yearning for something we have never fully known, and yet know we were made for. When I first encountered certain stories, whether in Norse myths, in George MacDonald's fairy tales, or in the lines of Milton, I felt not merely entertained but summoned. They spoke of a joy larger than themselves, a joy that no earthly satisfaction could quite provide. And that longing was not a mockery, but a clue. It was, if I may put it so, the scent of a flower I have not yet found, the echo of a tune I have not yet heard, the glimpse of a country I have not yet reached. Imagination is the faculty that detects this fragrance, hears this echo, and sights this far-off land. It is through imagination that we may understand the paradox of Christian hope. We are told to rejoice always, and yet we walk in a world of grief. How shall we hold both joy and sorrow without tearing ourselves apart? Reason alone cannot reconcile them, but imagination can see the shadows as shapes cast by a brighter light. When a man buries his friend, imagination, sanctified by faith, whispers that the grave is not the end, but the beginning of a seed's growth. Death itself, so final to the senses, becomes through imagination a door, a veil, a sleep before dawn. But here lies the danger. The world also knows how to enslave imagination. It offers us false paradises, utopias crafted by ideology, fantasies sold by commerce, idols painted by lust, and many are content to dwell in these counterfeits, mistaking them for the true country. Thus, imagination must be disciplined, as a stallion must be bridled. When it runs wild, it may carry a man into delusion. When yoked to truth, it carries him toward glory. The Scriptures are the map, reason is the compass, and imagination is the wind in the sails. Remove any one of these, and the voyage is imperiled. Let us remember, too, that imagination is essential for love. You cannot love what you cannot first imagine. To forgive one who has wronged you, you must imagine him not merely as he is, but as he might be, restored by grace. To serve the poor, you must imagine their suffering as though it were your own. Even Christ's command to love your neighbor as yourself presumes imagination. To see another's life, another's pain, another's joy through the window of your own heart. Without imagination, love shrivels into duty. With imagination, duty blossoms into compassion. I am convinced that on the last day, when we stand before the unveiled presence of God, our imaginations will at last be healed and enlarged. We shall see not in broken metaphors or half-understood symbols, but face to face. Yet, even then, I suspect, imagination will not vanish. It will be fulfilled, for eternity is not the death of wonder, but its perfection. What we now grope after in story, in beauty, in longing, will become endless discovery, ever new, ever deeper, ever joyful. Imagination will become sight, but sight will open into more than we can now conceive. Therefore, let no man despise this holy gift. To live without imagination is to live deaf to the music of heaven. To scorn it is to reject one of the choicest instruments by which God prepares our souls for eternity. For it is imagination that teaches us that every bush may be aflame with His glory, if only we will take off our shoes and see. If imagination is the organ of meaning, then the world itself is the great text upon which God has written. Our task is not merely to glance at the letters, but to read the story, to discern in the pattern of creation the voice of the author. Yet many move through life as though they were proofreaders of the universe, checking facts, measuring lines, noting errors, without ever asking what the text means. They know the syllables of the world, but not its song. Imagination reminds us that the world is not simply there. It is given. Every sunrise, every breath, every friendship is not a random occurrence, but a gift. To perceive life as gift requires more than reason. It requires the imagination to see beyond utility into grace. Bread is not only nutrition, but symbol. Wine is not only liquid, but joy. Marriage is not only contract, but covenant. These layers of meaning are revealed to us when imagination is awake, and veiled from us when it slumbers. One might object, does not imagination lead us into illusions, into wishful thinking, into dreams too sweet for this harsh world? I would reply, yes, it can, but so can reason when misused. For the danger of abuse is not the denial of use. A knife may wound, but it may also prepare the feast. A ship may sink, but it may also bring us home. To abandon imagination because it may mislead is as foolish as refusing to walk because one may stumble. Rather, we must train it, discipline it, sanctify it. Think of prayer. Prayer is not merely informing God of what He already knows. It is not a transaction, but a transformation. And imagination has a vital role within it. When you kneel, you are not only speaking into the silence, you are imagining yourself before the throne of grace, in the presence of one who is more real than the ground upon which you kneel. This imaginative posture is not falsehood. It is the truest recognition of reality, a reality which reason alone cannot display. For prayer without imagination becomes rote, but prayer with imagination becomes encounter. So too with Scripture. To read, "The Lord is my shepherd," without imagination is to leave the verse dead on the page. But to let imagination work is to feel the grass underfoot, to hear the stream's ripple, to see the rod and staff that comfort. The truth was always there, but imagination makes it known in the marrow of our being. Thus, the Bible is not only to be studied with reason, but inhabited with imagination. Even our moral life depends upon imagination. A man cannot repent if he cannot imagine the horror of his sin. He cannot forgive if he cannot imagine the pain of the other. He cannot endure if he cannot imagine the joy set before him. The saints endured martyrdom, not by reason alone, but because imagination had fixed their eyes on a crown that reason could not calculate. And here we approach the great paradox. Imagination is most alive when it bows before reality. When it becomes the servant of truth, it is liberated. When it rebels and tries to create its own reality, it becomes tyrant and deceiver. The true task, then, is not to silence imagination, nor to worship it, but to baptize it. Only then does it perform its proper office, making the invisible visible, the distant near, the eternal meaningful. Have you ever noticed how joy often comes upon us unbidden, like a shaft of light through a crack in the door? You are walking along an ordinary road, and suddenly the scent of lilac, the cry of a bird, or the laughter of a child pierces you with a happiness so sharp it almost hurts. What has happened in that moment? Imagination has leapt to life. You are reminded of something beyond the moment, something the moment only hints at. The joy is real, but it is not complete. It is a signpost pointing to another country. That piercing longing is not to be despised. It is to be cherished, for it is the very fingerprint of God upon the soul. And thus we come full circle. Imagination is the organ of meaning. It does not replace truth, but renders truth inhabitable. It does not fabricate reality, but awakens us to the reality already given. It teaches us to live, not merely to exist, to love, not merely to function, to hope, not merely to endure. To be without imagination is to be without vision, and where there is no vision, the people perish. So I say, do not fear to dream, but dream truly. Do not fear to long, but long rightly. For in the redeemed imagination lies not escape from the world, but entry into its deepest meaning. And if you follow where imagination leads, you may discover that it has all along been leading you home. And now, as we near the end of this reflection, let me leave you with one final thought. Imagination, when cleansed and rightly ordered, is not merely a faculty of the mind, but a sacrament of the heart. It is the lamp of meaning, by which even the darkest paths are illumined. Without it, we stumble in a world of facts without significance, like men counting coins without knowing their value. But with it, we see life transfigured. The ordinary bread becomes a symbol of divine provision, the friend's smile a glimpse of eternal fellowship, the turning of the seasons a parable of death and resurrection. It is often said that the greatest enemy of faith is doubt. But I would suggest that the greater enemy is not doubt, but desolation, the inability to see meaning in anything. Doubt still wrestles with truth, still imagines that truth may exist. But desolation is the shriveling of imagination, the closing of the windows, the refusal to let light fall upon the soul. And so the Christian must guard imagination, not as a plaything, but as a vital organ, without which the soul cannot breathe. Think of the saints who have gone before us. Their greatness did not consist in cold calculation, but in a vision of reality so rich that they were willing to lay down their lives for it. Augustine imagined the city of God, radiant beyond all earthly kingdoms. Francis imagined the whole creation singing praise with him, brother sun and sister moon included. Dante imagined the soul's ascent through hell and purgatory into heaven, and in so doing gave generations a ladder for their own longings. Their faith was not less reasonable because it was imaginative. It was more complete. And what of us? We too are called to live imaginatively, to see the beggar not only as a nuisance, but as Christ in disguise, to see suffering not only as pain, but as the plowing of the field for a harvest of righteousness, to see our fleeting joys not as ends in themselves, but as foretastes of the banquet yet to come. If we learn to live in this way, then we live already as citizens of heaven, though our feet still walk upon the dust. Imagination is not the whole of faith, but it is the doorway into its depth. Reason may tell us that God exists, but imagination allows us to taste and see that He is good. Reason may argue that heaven is real, but imagination makes us homesick for it. Reason may affirm that Christ is Lord, but imagination bends the knee in adoration before His glory. And so I urge you, do not neglect this gift. Nurture it, sanctify it, offer it back to its Maker. For the imagination rightly used will not lead you into fantasy, but into the heart of reality itself. It will awaken in you the meaning you were made for, the joy that is your true inheritance, and the love that will one day swallow up all shadows. For in the end, imagination is not merely about seeing more. It is about seeing truly. It is about recognizing that behind every story lies the story, behind every beauty the beauty, behind every longing the love that will never end. And if, by the grace of God, we allow our imaginations to be baptized in truth, then even here and now, in this shadowed land, we may walk with eyes open, hearts alive, and souls already tasting the joy of the world to come. Thank you, my friends, for walking with me through these reflections. If you have found in them some spark of light, some stirring of the heart, I invite you to carry it further. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, so that together we may continue this journey of faith, reason, and imagination, ever seeking the light that leads us home.